Hello, boys and girls. So today is NTI day 18, and you're going to be reading two stories today about the importance of recycling and reusing trash. And the assignment afterwards, you have the importance of recycling here and reusing trash there. And you're finding three important details or three important points. And remember, when you're looking at those paragraphs, really look at the first sentence in each paragraph. So for example, if I started off with the importance of recycling, it says we use resources from our planet to make things like toys, cars, dishes, houses, and so much more. This is a good thing. Our Earth has been good to us, and now it's time to return the favor. So that's kind of like the introduction. And then the first paragraph after that says we mix resources like wood, oil, and minerals from the earth with other things to create the stuff we use every day. The problem is when we do this, we create something that stays around forever. Items such as plastic won't decompose or break down. The problem with this is that most people just throw it away when they are finished. Where does it all go? So when I'm finding the main idea of that paragraph, I'm going to look at the first sentence and the last sentence and see which one I think is going to be the main idea. We mix resources like wood, oil, and minerals from the earth with other things to create the stuff we use every day. Okay, the problem is when we do this, we create something that stays around forever. So that paragraph is all about how when we make new things, we what? It doesn't what? It doesn't go away. So everything that we've ever thrown away that's plastic, like let's say I took this pen right here is made of plastic. If I took this pen and threw it in the garbage can, it would not decompose or break down. That means it's going to look like this for a really, really long time, no matter how long it stays outside. All of the plastic that we've ever thrown away still looks like it did when we thrown away. So if we think about all the stuff that we've thrown away, that's a lot of stuff. So if I was writing that in my own words, I would probably say something like, when we make new things out of plastic, they don't break down. They don't degrade or decompose. And then if you go to the next paragraph, it says landfills are places where trash is taken and dumped off. This space is limited, and when we fill it up, we have to find somewhere else to take the garbage. There is a solution, though, and that is to recycle. Recycling means that we reuse it or turn it into a new product. This keeps it from going into landfills and just sitting there. So I think that paragraph is all about landfills. Instead of sending things to landfills, we can recycle some of it. So if I was putting that into my own words, I would say something like recycling keeps trash from going into landfills and just sitting there and not decomposing. So that's what you're going to do for each paragraph, boys and girls. You don't have to do it for all the paragraphs. It's just three. You're finding three important points and then three important points in reusing trash. Then you're going to tell how the points are the same and how they're different. So if there's reusing trash, I'm sure they're going to say something about recycling. So if they say something about recycling, you can tie it into the importance of recycling and tell me what they say that's the same. And then you can tell me how they're different. And then there are some other questions about the story. This one says write three questions where the answer could be found in the text. So you're going to answer, or you're going to write three questions that you could answer. All right, I'm sorry, my phone is going off. Okay, so I also wanted, let's make my screen bigger. Okay, I also wanted to read you those Martin Luther King stories that we talked about. So this one is called Happy Birthday, Martin Luther King, and then we can compare and contrast it to the other one. Okay. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. His parents loved him very much. Martin Luther King had the same name as his father, except for one thing. His father was called Martin Luther King Sr. Martin was called Martin Luther King Jr. Martin went to elementary school, high school, and college in Atlanta. He was a good student. Later, he went to divinity school in Pennsylvania. So divinity school, boys and girls, is for religion. Martin became a pastor, just like his dad, at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. They were both called Reverend, the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. So he was a priest or a minister. He gave sermons. Martin's job as a minister was to help people in need. He visited sick people in the hospital and made them feel better. He asked people not to fight with each other. He said there were peaceful ways to solve problems. So Martin Luther King was all about nonviolence, solving things peacefully with our words, using your words like we talk about, boys and girls. And like his father, Martin led people in prayer and song. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. is famous because he helped our country change some of its laws. A law is like a rule. Once there was a law in some places that said only white people could sit in the front of a bus and that black people had to sit in the back. Martin Luther King said this law needed to be changed. Rosa Parks and other people helped him change it. Now, all people can sit in an empty seat they like. Once there were laws in some places that said that African Americans could only use certain restaurants and drinking fountains. Martin Luther King and many other people helped change these laws. Now, all people can share the same restaurants and drinking fountains. Once there was a law in some places that said that black children and white children couldn't go to school together. Martin Luther King and other people, including many brave children, had this law changed. Now, black children and white children could go to school together. Martin Luther King had a special talent for leadership. When he spoke, people listened. Poor people, rich people, white people, black people, and people from all around the world listened when Martin Luther King Jr. spoke. Many helped him work, march, sing, and pray for justice. In the summer of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave the most famous speech of his life. He gave it outdoors to 250,000 people who had come to Washington, D.C. to ask the president for jobs and freedom for black people. In his speech, Martin Luther King said that he had a dream. His dream was that people everywhere would learn to live together without being mean to one another. That's called the I Have a Dream speech, boys and girls, and it is really powerful. Miss Hay gets goosebumps whenever I hear it. And you can look that up on YouTube too if you want to listen to it. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed in 1968. Because he loved poor people so much, he was given a special funeral in Atlanta, Georgia, where he was born. His body was put in a simple farm cart and pulled slowly by 2 mules to a cemetery. Thousands of people walked behind Martin in a sad, loving parade. On his gravestone were carved these beautiful words, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Martin Luther King wanted people to be able to go places together, share food together, and love one another in peace. Because he worked so hard for freedom and helped so many people gain it, we honor him every year on his special day. We call this day Martin Luther King Day, and we say to him, Happy birthday, Martin Luther King. So that's why we're out of school on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, to celebrate him. All right, so that was the picture book. I'm not going to read you the entire chapter book because I'd run out of time. So I'm going to read the first little bit of it, and then we're going to talk about some of the differences that you hear. All right, so the introduction to this book says, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made history. He became famous for his work helping African Americans get equal rights. Do you know that Martin Luther King was given a different name when he was born? Martin Luther King Jr. was very active as a boy. Did you know he almost died in an accident? Martin Luther King Jr. loved to play football. Do you know what other sports he played? Martin Luther King Jr. grew up to be a Baptist minister. Do you know what other careers he considered? Martin Luther King worked hard to make sure laws were fair for all Americans, especially African Americans. Did you know Dr. King broke unfair laws and went to jail many times? Dr. King gave hundreds of speeches. Do you know what his most famous speech was? We do. We just answered that question. Dr. King worked hard to settle problems peacefully. Do you know what famous award he received for his work? The answers to these questions lie in who Martin Luther King Jr. was as a boy and as a young man. This book is mostly about Martin Luther King Jr. before he made history. So, that introduction gave questions that the author is going to answer in this book. So if we look back at our chart of what, sorry boys and girls, I need to make this smaller again. If we look back at our chart, sorry, I should have had this already pulled up. All right, back to our chart. If we look back at our chart, we can compare the main ideas of these books and the topics. So I want you to think in your brain, boys and girls, what was the topic or the main idea about both of those stories? What are they all about? All right, if you said they were both about Martin Luther King Jr., then you are exactly right. If you look at the next one, it says the details. Are the same facts in both? Do they have different facts? This book has a lot of different facts, but they did have some of the same. So let me read a few of these again, and we'll see if they are in the book or if they're not. So I know I can't see you right now, boys and girls, but I want you to give me a thumbs up if it is in the book that we just read, or if it was not in the book. Give me a flat hand, okay? So, do you know that Martin Luther King was given a different name when he was born? Did it talk about that in the first book? It did not. It did not. Did you know that he almost died in an accident when he was younger? Nope. Do you know what other careers he considered other than being a minister? Martin Luther King Jr. worked hard to make sure laws were fair for all Americans, especially African Americans. Was that in the book? Yep. Dr. King gave hundreds of speeches. Do you know what his most famous speech was? Was that in the book? It definitely was. So his famous I Have a Dream speech, that's his most famous speech. All right. And then it says, do you know what famous award he received for his work? Was that in the book? No. So there were some details. There were some details that were in that book that were in this book, but a lot of the facts that are in this book aren't in that one. All right. So the author's opinion, we know that the author's opinion of Martin Luther King Jr. in both of these books, if we read that first sentence in this one again, it says Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made history and he became famous. And it also says in this book, if we flip back, Martin Luther King Jr. wanted people to be able to go places together, share food together, and love one another in peace. Because he worked so hard for freedom and helped so many people gain it, we honor him every year on his special day. So I can tell by the words that both of these authors use, like famous and special, honor. Those words let me know that the author's opinion about Martin Luther King Jr. is that he was a good person, that he was a helpful person, a caring person. I can tell that by the word choices that the author uses in these books. All right. I hope that you all enjoyed that story about Martin Luther King Jr. There are a lot of resources out there about Martin Luther King Jr. He's one of my heroes personally, and I could learn about him all day long. All right, I hope that you all have a good day. I hope that you all have get outside today. Hopefully it's a little bit warmer than it has been. Can't believe it snowed. So I will talk to you all tomorrow.